All right, what's up, folks? Back for another episode of the Adventure One podcast, and I have come to realize something in my life. I like doing podcasts and videos about hiking, camping, hunting, fishing, all kinds of stuff. But deep down, I've realized that I'm a gun nut. I love shooting guns, rifles, pistols, shotguns, just about anything. And I'm afraid, at this point, it's uncurable. I think I might be stuck with it. But through the years of shooting all kinds of guns, working on guns, assembling some, all kinds of DIY stuff, talking to people in the industry, I have learned a lot, actually, a whole lot. And some of it is just, the FUD lore you hear in deer camps about what makes a good gun and what doesn't. And some of that's true, a lot of it's not. You kind of got to put it to the test. Some of it is stuff I've picked up from other YouTubers who really produce a lot of high-quality educational content. Some of the stuff is based on problems I've encountered and things I had to solve. And so I had to go digging, look for resources, looked in everything from videos to reloading manuals to manufacturer data. I also worked for quite a while with an accessory manufacturer. A company that made sights, optics, all kinds of other firearm accessories. And with that came a need for knowledge about firearms. So with all that, and I guess one other thing to note in there is my kind of newest hobby or newest endeavor. It seems like every year, kind of in the spring and summer, I get into it. Then hunting season comes up and I kind of drop it. But that's long-range precision shooting. And with that, I had to learn a lot of the science and the engineering and the physics behind things. So I want to start kind of a mini series, and this is probably going to be pretty sporadic through the podcast. They're not necessarily going to be in order, but every once in a while, I'm going to drop an episode entitled Ballistic Basics, and I'm going to go over some basic ballistic or firearms technology in terms of when launching a bullet out of a firearm, rifle, pistol, shotgun, whatever. How exactly does it work? Or let's explore one aspect of what's going on, what's important to impacting ammunition, bullet flight, that kind of stuff. So this isn't entirely going to be about reloading. It's not going to entirely be about precision shooting, but it's just going to be for those who are curious to understand why things work. There's a lot of us that know, we put a bullet in a gun and something goes off and there's something about a primer and some powder and there's a big boom and the bullet shoots out of the gun and it all just kind of works, but there's a lot more to it than that. So a lot of us kind of have a feel for what's going on, but this mini series is going to explore particular topics in more depth. And today I want to kick off the series by talking about twist rate. The majority of people who have ever shot a rifle or a handgun know there's something called rifling and know that a bullet is spinning when it comes out of the gun. And most of those people also know that it's the spinning that causes the bullet to be stable in flight. This spinning motion caused by the rifling is present in handguns, most importantly, modern pistols, rifles, even artillery pieces, pretty much anything but old school muskets and smoothbore shotguns. Anything with rifling will cause a projectile to spin, and the spinning motion is really important. As I said, it causes stability, and this gyroscopic effect doesn't just apply to bullets. If you look at many items that are designed to fly and fly well, you'll notice that they intentionally have spin imparted to them. And I'm not going to get too deep into the physics of the gyroscopic effect, but anything that's spinning generally gains stability. Hell, the Earth is spinning as it moves around the sun. It spins around its axis very consistently. You look at a football and you see when that's thrown. It's imparting spin onto the football that keeps it from wobbling and toppling end over end, but instead keeps it going in its course of motion. Even an arrow, something that's really long and straight, still has some spin to it. But all of these items, though the spin helps them fly with a greater rate of stability, they're not spinning at the same speed. So let's look at what that speed is, how we measure it, and why it's important. So a lot of objects that spin, be it the tires on your car or the propeller on an outboard engine, The rate of spin, or the rate at which something is turning, is measured in revolutions per minute, or RPM. But that doesn't really work for a bullet or a projectile, because how far does a bullet go in a minute? Depends on how far you're shooting. I don't think anybody's ever shot a bullet that stayed up in the air for a full minute. And also, as it slows down, it's going to encounter more air pressure, and the rate at which it's spinning is also going to slow down. So when we account for the air, it gets a little bit weird and it gets complicated, especially when you start looking at different density altitude. The air is going to be thicker when it's colder. It's going to be more dense, and that's going to hamper the spin and the motion of a bullet in every way compared to air that is warmer, or elevation, thinner air versus thicker air. It's all going to make it different. So the only place where we can actually accurately measure it is in the barrel. The second it goes past the muzzle, it starts slowing down, it starts spinning at a different rate, and things start getting crazy. So twist rate is generally defined and calculated within the barrel of a rifle. And I keep saying rifle here, but really I'm talking about rifling. Any muzzleloader, pistol, anything with rifling has a twist rate. It just seems like it's precision rifles or hunting rifles in general, where people tend to be most concerned with this and how it affects really bullet choice and some other things. So once it is measured and presented, the twist rate on a rifle will be listed as something like 1 in 10 or 1 in 8, 1 in 12, something like that. A lot of times it's just notated 1-8, 1-10, 1-12, or 1:8, 1:10, something like that. It can be listed a number of ways, but what are we talking about? What's the 1? What's the 10? It's always going to be a 1 because this is a ratio, but it's not 1 to 10 like parts per million or 1 part for every 10 parts. It's not a ratio like that. It is 1 revolution per a certain distance. And so for anything in America or any barrel really made in America, that's going to be a measurement listing of 1 full rotation, 360 degrees, for every 10 inches of barrel, given a 1 in 10 twist. Likewise, a 1 in 8 would be the barrel completes a full spin in 8 inches of barrel. 1 in 12, same thing. In 12 inches and 1 foot of barrel length, the bullet makes 1 full-size turn. So is this just some handy factoid to know about your gun? Oh, the bullet flies this speed, and every 8 inches it completes a rotation? Well, yeah, but it's actually a lot more practical than that. And it's practical and helpful for the purpose of bullet selection, because different bullets are going to match better to different twist rates. Obviously, there are a lot of cartridges that use the same bullet diameters and can use the same bullet designs. For example, on American Standard, the .308, the .30-06, and the .300 Win Mag could all shoot the same bullet. You could put a 150 grain bullet, whether it's a soft point, FMJ, that doesn't really matter for the discussion of twist rate, but a 150 grain bullet, 30 cal or .308, would work in any single one of these cartridges. But when you look at the reloading section of your local gun store, or pick up a reloading manual, or just look at all the different options available in these calibers, you'll notice there's a huge range. You can get a 110 grain .308 bullet. In fact, that's what I use in my 300 Blackout. The Hornady VMAX 110 is intended to be a varmint bullet, high-speed bullet that basically just blows up on impact and doesn't really penetrate well. It's meant to be a super light 308 load. Works great in my 300 Blackout, but you'll notice that you can go up to 147. That's a common size in 308. 168 grain, the Sierra Match King. That is kind of the gold standard of target performance for the 308 Winchester. You can find 165s, pretty common for a 30-06, 180. You can run that in a 30-06, but that's where you're really getting into 300 Win Mag territory, which can go up to 200 and even 220. So there's a huge range of bullet selection. But why does it matter? Well, obviously there's the amount of oomph, the amount of power you put behind it. If you put more powder and a bigger cartridge behind a bullet, yeah, you can get a larger bullet going at about the same speed, but twist rate also plays a role in this. Larger bullets require a faster rate of twist, and smaller bullets require a slower rate of twist. Now, when I say larger versus smaller, that gets a little bit confusing and complicated because we're talking about the same caliber, right? So 308, I'm talking about different dimensions of the bullet other than the diameter, because they're all going to be 308 diameter. So this gets a little confusing in terms of, are we talking about the mass of the bullet, the grain weight? Well, yes, kind of, but we're more importantly talking about the length of the bullet. And when I say the length, that can be measured in several ways. It seems pretty obvious to measure the bullet from the very tip to the very end, from front to back, head to tail, bow to stern, whatever you want to call it. But that's not the most accurate way, and it doesn't really impact twist rate as much as some other measurements. So in reloading, some people will measure cartridge overall length, which is bow to stern, tip to tail, the overall length of the bullet itself. Usually that's the overall cartridge length that people are talking about. And then you have the ogive. So that is the curved taper of the bullet. Some pistol rounds have no ogive at all. It's just a straight line and then a flat tip. Some precision long-range rifle rounds have a very, very long, gentle sloping ogive, whereas some pretty much round off like a ball. And it is after the ogive that where the projectile flattens out and it becomes the full diameter. So again, in the case of a 308, where the taper stops and it becomes the full 308 diameter, that is called the bearing surface. So the surface where the bullet is full-sized, basically, and how large, or most importantly, how long is the bearing surface. It is the bearing surface that actually grips the rifling. So you may have a bullet that's a certain length, but only half of the length of that bullet is actually the bearing surface. That's what plays an important role in selecting the right twist rate or selecting the right bullet for a given twist rate. So the bearing surface is a critical component of this, but it's not the full story. Ultimately, we are talking about the overall length of the bullet and the bearing surface. And so when this is gripping the rifling, a longer projectile needs to spin faster in order to be stable. Because the projectile itself is longer, it has a longer axis on which it can wobble, on which it can be unstable. And so by spinning it more, by spinning it faster, is how you stabilize these longer, larger projectiles. And so let's look at the opposite of that. If you have a very short projectile or a light projectile, and I'm not going to totally equate the length of a projectile with the weight, but obviously they're correlated. If a bullet's the same diameter and is longer, given the same material, it's going to weigh more. And a lot of people kind of conflate these or confuse these. They are directly related, but the length is actually what we're talking about here. If you have a shorter projectile, you don't need to spin it as fast in order to stabilize it. Well, does spinning it faster hurt it? It can. It can cause some instability if it spins so fast that it starts flying a little bit out of control, or it can increase spin drift at longer ranges. Again, that's another topic. We'll probably talk about spin drift in one of these Ballistic Basic episodes. Not today. This topic's complicated enough, so we'll save spin drift for another day. But it more gets down to the fact of if I don't need to spin it faster and I'm engaging it in the rifling and forcing it to spin faster, I'm slowing down the bullet. I'm causing a lot of friction. So a smaller bullet, a shorter bullet that you're not needing to spin as fast, a lot of times that'll have a slower rate of twist. And it's kind of confusing because I'm talking about a slower rate of twist equating to a faster projectile because you're not increasing the friction. And so just to go back a little bit, when I say a slower rate of twist, 1 in 12 is a slower rate of twist than 1 in 8. Again, it's getting a complete rotation across a longer distance. So the rate at which it turns, the rate at which it spins is slower. So if you have one of these short, lighter weight projectiles that doesn't need a lot to get it to be stable, you're not going to want to interfere with the bullet. you're going to want to keep it going fast, keep its energy, keep it moving very quickly and powerfully. So you'll use usually the minimum rate of twist required. And so you can look at a lot of old, smaller caliber varmint rifles, 223, 222, 204 Ruger. A lot of these smaller guns have up to a 1 in 12 twist, whereas most common hunting rifles have something somewhere around a 1 in 10 is pretty common. So in 10 inches of barrel, the bullet will complete a full rotation. That's what a lot of 30-06 rifles are. Not all. That's what my 270 Winchester is. And there's just kind of a normal class of hunting rifles that hit a normal velocity and use approximately the same bullet weight and bullet size, kind of that 130 to 160-ish range. Again, this is very general because we're talking about a lot of different calibers, not anything specific. But kind of that 1 in 10 is pretty standard. It goes up to 109 in some places. And then it starts getting faster. And a lot of times this is when you get into smaller diameters, but you still want to shoot a heavy bullet. You end up with a long and skinny projectile. So it has a very long axis in which it can wobble and yaw and not fly well. So in order to stabilize it, you really got to get that sucker spinning very, very quickly. So that's when you get into your 1 in 8s, 1 in 7s. There's actually a projectile, I think it was announced last year, but this year, 2022, at SHOT Show, I finally saw announcements of rifles designed for it, and that is the new 8.6 Blackout. Not to be confused with the 300 Blackout, it's kind of leaning on that name and that concept of taking a big rifle bullet and putting it in a short, stubby little case. And so the 8.6 Blackout is a 33 caliber round, I believe. I believe it's basically the same bullet from like a 338 Lapua Magnum or a 338 Win Mag. Big bullet shoved in a short action, tiny little case. And it seems cool, the idea that you can throw a projectile that big from a case that short, but then it gets the problem of you have so much mass and so much length in such a small case that you really have to spin this thing fast in order to stabilize it. And the twist rates on these rifles are insane. It's like a drill bit. They're spinning it like, I think, 1 in 3, 1 in 4. And so I think that's one of the things that's going to hinder this round is it just requires totally different barrel manufacturing processes than other things. But that is the extreme end of a fast twist rate. The extreme end of a slow twist rate would be something like my muzzleloader. It's using a sabot, a plastic sabot, to grip the rifling. You don't want to overspin it. And it's a slow-moving projectile, just a big, heavy thing. And it's kind of short and stubby. It's not long and skinny. So you don't need it to get spinning super fast. So I think I have a 1 in 20, 1 in 24, something like that on my muzzleloader. So I hope that helps you understand what twist rate is and kind of establishes the spectrum. I think a really helpful example of this in practical application is from the U.S. Army. So the original M16A1, basically the granddad of your AR-15, was designed by Eugene Stoner, and then the patent was transferred and they were manufactured for the Army by Colt. And those original Colts, the M16s and M16A1s, used a 1 in 12 twist rate. And this is in a longer 20-inch barrel, I believe, that gets a lot more velocity, a lot more power because more pressure is building up behind it. But it was not spinning extremely quickly. Even though the velocity was very high, it was not spinning at a high rate. So for every 12 inches of barrel, it completed 1 rotation. This worked really well when the Army was using the XM193, or I guess the M193 55 grain FMJ bullet. Short, tiny little bullet. Not very long, not very heavy. But when the Army wanted to go up to something a little heavier that packed a little bit more punch, that hit harder, and especially the 62 grain green tips or steel penetrator rounds that got even longer, well, they needed to do something different, because if you try shooting one of those in your barrel, yeah, it's going to function just fine. And you'll hear people say things like, oh, you can't shoot the green tips in an old M16A1? Well, you can. They just won't be very accurate because the slow twist rate of that barrel is going to fail to stabilize the longer, heavier bullet. So the Army went to faster twist rates. Then you started seeing a 1 in 9. So completes one rotation in every 9 inches of barrel. And then eventually the U.S. military pretty much standardized on the 1 in 7. And so across civilian issued rifles, you see the full range. If you see a gun that's more of a classic varminter where you're not going to be shooting really heavy projectiles, typically you want to shoot a really, really lightweight, fast-moving projectile that's going to be a very flat shooting gun. It's not going to drop a lot just because your velocity is incredibly high because you're shooting a 40, 45, 50, up to 55 grain projectile. You're going to see like a 1 in 12 again. Maybe 1 in 14. I think 1 in 12 is pretty common. 1 in 10 is also pretty common. But then when you get into most AR-15s, I see 1 in 9s very commonly. That 1 in 9 twist will stabilize a 55 grain well, and it'll kind of stabilize the 62. I would say it would stabilize the 62 and maybe like a 64 soft point, something like that. But then when you get into the even heavier rounds, you need something even faster. And so that's when the 1 in 7 twist. So again, one rotation and every 7 inches of barrel came out. And that works well for a lot of these heavy rounds. So if you're shooting 62, it's going to be great. 64, it's going to be great. 75 grain, I like to use the Hornady boat tail hollow point. That's a very good bullet, and it stabilizes well in a 1 in 8 or 1 in 7 twist. I think the extreme end within an AR-15 is like the Black Hills ammunition. This is the Mark 262. It's basically the 223 sniper round. So this uses a 77 grain bullet, and it pretty much has to be fired from a 1 in 7 or 1 in 8 twist. Because if you try shooting that thing in an old school, like an M16A1 or even a 1 in 9 twist, it's just not going to be accurate. And the whole purpose of that bullet is enhanced accuracy. So I got on this subject and wanted to record it as a podcast because my buddy Nate has an old 30-06, and he was talking about stocking up on some ammo, and he wanted to shoot a couple different rounds and see what his gun liked best, and then once he figured that out, to stock up on a bunch. And I think that's a valid process, and these days it can be a very expensive process. If you're reloading, it's a little bit more convenient because you can say, okay, here's a bullet it likes. Then you can mess with charge weights, and then you don't have to buy full boxes of loaded ammunition just to shoot 5 rounds to figure it out. You can load different bullets or different lengths or different powder charges. But if you're not reloading, there's kind of no way around it. You have to buy several boxes to figure out what your gun likes. But you can at least get headed in the right direction by selecting a bullet design or a bullet length or bullet weight that matches the twist rate of your gun. So if you're shooting a 30-06 and you know that the twist rate is a 1 in 10, I'd probably start at 150 grain. It's probably a good place to start. I'd probably buy a box of 150 and a box of 165 and see what it likes better. And if it tends to like the 165 better, I'll probably buy 1 or 2 more boxes of 165, and of those, see what shoots the best. If it likes the 150, likewise. Buy a couple other 150s, see what it likes best. So I know that my 270 Winchester, my go-to hunting rifle, I really like that thing. And traditionally, old school hunting bullets at 150s are not very accurate in that gun, but the 130 were very accurate. And I think some of that had to do with the fact that 270, it's a smaller diameter, but it was still a 1 in 10 twist rate. So it's not able to stabilize those really big, heavy, old school projectiles. But the Hornady ELDX is a 145, but it's got an interesting design. It's got a poly tip. It's got a really interesting ogive and a nice taper to it. And it's a 145. And I can actually get very good accuracy out of that. So I think that's kind of I've maxed out the optimum for that rifle. So learning about the twist rate of your gun will help you to select the right bullet, whether you're just buying ammo in the store or whether you're stocking up, instead of saying, oh, my gun just didn't like that, I don't know why, let me try something else, it can give you a little bit more data and a little bit more information behind making that decision. So we've talked about what twist rate is. We've talked about why it's important, kind of the history of why it's important has been applied. But that leaves us with one common thing. How do I determine the twist rate of my rifle? Well, on a lot of modern sporting rifles, as people like to call them, AR-15s, precision bolt actions, stuff like that, as bullet designs continue to get more and more advanced, a lot of these rifle companies and barrel companies are realizing people now care about twist rate a lot more, and they're actually stamping it on the barrels. Most AR-15 barrels will have it stamped. They'll say 1 in 8, 1 in 10. Usually, like I said earlier, it's like a 1:8, something like that. And that's very helpful to know because a lot of people are building these AR-15s, and they have a specific purpose, whether you're building an AR pistol or a just standard carbine or something that's a long-range precision build. You're going to want to use a different twist rate depending on your application. It's going to affect your effective range, your ammo choice, a lot of things. So usually it'll be stamped on those barrels. And it's quite common in that world too, where the barrel manufacturer is different from the manufacturer of other parts of the rifle. So that's why it's always stamped on the barrel itself. You may have one company that makes the forgings or the furniture or the trigger, but the barrel manufacturer is entirely done by an OEM factory that makes barrels for a lot of different brands. So they'll stamp it on there, or machine it on there, rather, in these modern manufacturing methods. So if you have a rifle that is a bit of a mystery, if you don't know what the twist rate, because it's not just printed or stamped or engraved on the gun, you have to do a little bit of research. And I would say the first place to look for is just see if you can find a product manual from that brand. Say you have a Remington 700. Go to Remington and find, okay, that's a 700 ADL or 700 SPS or BDL or whatever the model is. Look up the caliber, and that's important because a 300 Win Mag and a 243 are probably not going to have the same twist rate. So look up the caliber and barrel length. It doesn't necessarily have to be the exact same model because a lot of times they'll use the same barrel, but plastic stock, wood stock, combo with a scope. There'll be several submodels, but as long as it has the same barrel or very close to the same barrel, it'll usually list the rate of twist of that barrel. So that's great if you can find it. Or in the case of my example, the Remington 700, that rifle's been made for decades. How do I know that a 70s 700 is going to be the same as a 2010 700? Well, you don't. I think within the caliber, they're going to be very, very similar because there haven't been too many changes. Usually when there's a change that drastic, it invokes the need for a new caliber. I think a really good example of that is the new 6.8 Western. So it's labeled 6.8 to kind of jump on the metric bandwagon, but it's the same bullet as fired by a 270 Winchester, or the same bullet diameter, but it allows a longer chamber for some of these higher BC, longer bullets and a different rate of twist. So that'll be interesting to see how that evolves. But all that to say, you can't always know that an old rifle design is going to match a new rifle design in terms of the twist rate of the barrel. So if you have to measure it yourself, guess what? There's a way that you can do it. And all you really need is a cleaning rod or any other rod that you can safely put down your barrel that's not going to scratch up your rifling. Like a thin wood dowel would probably be fine. Cleaning rod, something that most people have. It's intended to go in your bore, so that's what I would recommend. So first of all, don't use a steel cleaning rod in a rifle. It's fine in like military rifles that aren't intended to be particularly accurate. They just wanted a cleaning rod that wouldn't break or bend. That's why AK-47s have a steel cleaning rod. They just want to be able to fit in the bore. I would recommend an aluminum or carbon rod. And this is where you're going to have to use your imagination and just kind of visualize with me. I know it's an audio experience, but you're just going to have to visualize what this looks like. So take your cleaning rod, put a jag that's appropriate to the caliber that you're using. So one that fits within your bore, and then put a patch on the jag so that it will actually engage and grip the rifling in the barrel. Doesn't matter if you have oil on the patch or not. If you want to do this while you're cleaning it, go ahead and throw some solvent on there. Throw some oil on there. So you will insert that into the chamber of the rifle, obviously with everything safe and unloaded, and you will insert it in the breech, not from the bore end, in the breech end, until you feel it engage the rifling. As soon as you feel it engage the rifling, look back somewhere in the middle of the cleaning rod, somewhere well beyond where it's sticking out. Put a piece of tape and fold the tape up so it makes a little flag. So the two sticky sides are together and you have a flag pointed straight up or straight down. I wouldn't go left or right. I'd go straight up or straight down. And then from the edge of that tape that's closest to the rifle, take out your ruler and measure the distance of that tape to any fixed point. I would say to the breech or to the chamber or any marking or line on the rifle. It doesn't really matter what it is because you're just going to compare this to another measurement in the future. So measure that distance. Say it's 15 inches. And then you're going to start slowly pushing the cleaning rod through. And as it engages the rifling, you will feel it starting to want to twist and spin. Don't fight it. Let it spin. If you have one of those Dewey cleaning rods or one of the rods that can spin that's got like a little swivel on the end of it, that works best. If you don't have one of those, just a gentle touch on a normal cleaning rod will be fine. But let it spin. Let it rotate. It'll probably rotate clockwise. That's the direction most rifling is cut. Some guns, it's cut counterclockwise, but most American guns, it has a right-hand twist. So you'll see that tape, that little flag, start to turn around to the right. It'll make a half circle, and eventually it'll come up and make a full circle. As soon as it gets to your starting point, stop. You're going to want to measure it again from the same place on the tape. We used the front edge earlier to the same point that you measured from previously. So if previously that dimension, that length was 15 inches, and after one full twist, we see that our measurement now says 5 inches, we now know that the bullet, that the rifling, makes one complete rotation in 10 inches of barrel. And now you have successfully measured the twist rate of your gun. I hope you found this interesting. I hope you learned what twist rate is, how to measure it, why it matters, some history behind it. Maybe this will help you the next time you're selecting ammo, or if you're getting into reloading and you're trying to pick out a good bullet for your gun, this can save you some steps in getting a bullet that's going to fly accurately. So stay tuned for more of these ballistic basics. I didn't know that even I could talk for 30 minutes on something as simple as twist rate, but I think it's important to explore why this stuff matters, historically, why we even consider this, why it's important, and ultimately we can learn together about this kind of stuff. Hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, stay safe, be free, and never stop seeking adventure.